The police state. How far the Nazis create a totalitarian state. In this video, we're going to be focusing on the existence of a police state in Germany under the Nazis. We'll be looking at the Nazi police organisations, the setting up of concentration camps, controlling the legal system, and controlling religion. A totalitarian police state. Nazi Germany has been described as a police state, which is a key term which you need to learn for this course. And by police state, we mean a state where the police are used to control what people did, with people who disobeyed being punished. And in particular in Nazi Germany, this was about the secret police exerting a lot of influence over ordinary people to make sure they acted in a certain way. It's also been described as a totalitarian state, which is a country where the government controls all areas of public life. And in this video, we'll be looking at how much it became a police state and how much it became a totalitarian state. So key to the police state was the Nazi control of the police. The state police were controlled by central government but run by the local government. Now in January 1933, Hitler had become Chancellor, but with still much of the power of the Reichstag being with von Papen and power of the government being with Hindenburg. So Hitler realised his control over both central and actually over the local government was weak, and so his control over the police was weak. Therefore he decided to set up his own police organisations to help him control the people. These were controlled directly by the Nazi Party and were accountable to them, and as we know, Hitler, as the key leader of the Nazi Party, they were directly accountable to him. So these Nazi police forces were divided into three main organisations: the SS, or Protection Squad, the SD, the Security Service, and the Gestapo, the secret state police. Initially, these were three separate organisations. However, the SS ended up controlling all three. And the SS was run by Heinrich Himmler, whilst the SD and Gestapo were run by his deputy, Reinhard Heydrich. Now the thing to remember is that there was still a normal police, but the Nazi police operated above and in areas that the normal police could not operate in. The first and in many ways most important part of this was the SS, or Protection Squad. Now they had originally been set up in 1925 as simply 240 personal bodyguards for Hitler, and were effectively just an elite part of the SA at that point. In 1929, Himmler, in the picture here, took it over, and in 1932 it was given its distinctive black uniforms to distinguish it from the brown-shirted SA. In the early 1930s, they were the Nazi Party's private police force who were completely loyal to Hitler and effectively were there to defend Hitler and regulate the Nazi Party. So, when the Night of the Long Knives happened in 1934, purging the SA and in particular its leader Ernst Röhm, it was SS officers who carried out this act for Hitler. They were expanded in the 1930s to 240,000 people and put in charge of all police and security forces in the 1930s as the most fanatically loyal group to Hitler. And eventually there was even an armed forces part of the SS who fought in World War II. Himmler always believed the SS operated above the law and so could not be prosecuted in the courts for their actions and could act pretty much without anyone controlling them. He was also very keen to recruit racially pure Aryans to be a role model to all and ensured they only married Aryan wives. Any deviation from this was treated harshly. So one example of this would be that occasionally homosexuals were caught in the SS, and these were treated very harshly, effectively being sent to concentration camps and being killed whilst there. The SD, or Security Force, were originally formed by Himmler as a security force to monitor the Nazis' opponents in the run-up to the elections. They kept records of everyone suspected of opposing the Nazi Party or the German government at home or abroad. These manual records were kept at the Nazi headquarters in Munich and were kept as a Rolodex as a series of cards. They were led by Reinhard Heydrich in the picture here. The Gestapo, or State Secret Police. In many ways, these were the group that were most feared by people and had the biggest impact in the Nazi police state. They were non-uniform secret police set up in 1933 by Hermann Goering. So by this we mean that they were dressed in normal clothes and were there to spy on ordinary people. They came under the SS control in 1934, and Reinhard Heydrich took command from 1936, effectively controlling the SS and the SD and being Himmler's deputy. This effectively created a unified police force, as all areas of the police state were controlled by Himmler and Heydrich together. Now, the Gestapo's role was to identify anyone criticising or opposing the Nazi government. Now, in a difference to the SD, who were mainly looking at political opponents, these were looking at anyone who would criticise or oppose the government. They spied on people, tapped their phones, and had a large network as informers. So actually, often a block of housing would have at least one Gestapo informant there who would pass on any information to the Gestapo they felt was necessary, which resulted in neighbours sometimes just telling on their friends and neighbours to try and get them in trouble. In 1939, they arrested 160,000 people, and they had powers to torture suspects when questioning them, and many people died in the Gestapo custody. Effectively, their main weapon was fear, as they could act outside the law and imprison without trial, and because they killed so many people. So fear was actually more powerful often than the actual Gestapo. There's only 30,000 Gestapo to police 80 million Germans, and in some large towns such as Hamburg there were fewer than 50 officers, many of whom were simply clerical staff. So to many people, the fear of being informed on to the Gestapo was actually greater than the actual danger of it happening. So the Nazis were also renowned for their concentration camps, an idea which was originally set up by the British in the Boer War. By 1939, the Nazis had 150,000 people held in prisons for political crimes. So these were not people who were common criminals, these were people who were being held because the Nazis disapproved of what they were doing, such as voicing views opposed to Hitler. To cope with this huge amount of prisoners, they set up new prisons called concentration camps, which were run by the SA and the SS. The first camp actually opened in Dachau in 1933. The camps were set up in isolated areas away from the public, and this was because they didn't want people to be seeing what was happening in these concentration camps, because they were often brutal and involved many deaths. The inmates of the concentration camps were these people being held for political crimes. Now by this would include undesirables, such as prostitutes or homosexuals, that the Nazis considered to be people they did not want in their society. And similarly, this also involved minority groups, such as Jews or Gypsies, who the Nazis believed polluted the Aryan race, but also political prisoners, communists, intellectuals or political writers who might oppose the Nazis, and later on, priests and religious people who opposed the Nazi regime. As well as controlling the police, Hitler realised that controlling the legal system was key to ensure the police state remained. In particular, he focused on judges. He realised that if he controlled the legal system, it would make sure that his party were not prosecuted for the criminal acts they were carrying out, and that the Gestapo and the SS would be able to operate above the law, and also that he could influence the courts into locking up his opponents. So he set up the National Socialist League for the Maintenance of the Law and insisted that all judges must be members. Effectively, this meant any judge who displeased Hitler was removed from the organisation and so could no longer be a judge, effectively ensuring that the courts were heavily biased in favour of the Nazis. He told the judges that if there was a conflict between the law and the interests of the Nazis, they had to follow the Nazi party interests rather than the law. So really enshrining the idea that Nazis operated above the law. Hitler also took action to make sure he controlled the law courts as well as the judges. First of all, he abolished trial by jury, ensuring that judges that he controlled decided whether someone was innocent or guilty, and then decided on the sentence that was given down to them. He also set up a new People's Court to hear all cases of treason against the state. The judges were hand-picked and the trials were held in secret. There was no right of appeal against convictions, and between 1934 to 9, 534 people were sentenced to death for treason. Now, in comparison, between 1930 and 32, only 8 people had been sentenced to death for treason. So clearly the Nazis were using this as a way of getting rid of a lot of people who opposed them. Hitler actually sometimes even imposed sentences himself, or he relied on fanatical judges like Roland Friesler, pictured here, to do it for him. 90% of the cases Friesler heard resulted in the death penalty, and he became well known for bullying defendants, shouting over their attempts to speak and verbally abusing them in the courtroom. As well as controlling people through the police state and through the courts, the Nazis also looked at controlling people's religious views, both looking at the Catholic and the Protestant church. Now effectively, the worry was the Christian values of tolerance and peace went against the Nazi ideology of strength and violence and racial superiority. However, Hitler knew the power of the church and initially tried to work with the Christian churches and reassure them and encourage them to work with the Nazis, but this didn't really work. He was particularly worried about the Catholics, who owed their allegiance to the Pope first and had their own schools that did not teach Nazi ideology, and so he saw them as a group who could easily oppose him and could reach out to many German people. So he signed a Concordat agreement in July 1933 with the Pope, stating that he would allow freedom of worship for the Catholics and not interfere with their schools. In return, the Catholics would not interfere with politics, and the German bishops would swear an oath of loyalty to the Nazis, effectively agreeing that he would leave the Catholic Church alone if they did not criticise the Nazi regime and the things that they were doing. However, Hitler did not stick to this agreement. He went around arresting Catholic priests and harassed many who were not overtly pro-Nazi, with many ending up in concentration camps. He made sure that Catholic churches schools were either closed or were brought in line with the state schools, and Catholic youth activities such as the Catholic Youth League were banned. So eventually, in 1937, Pope Pius XI issued a stinging criticism of the Nazis, but in essence this was too little too late. The Nazis were also conscious of the power of the Protestant church in Germany. However, some Protestants were very grateful to the Nazis for protecting them from the communists, who were very anti-religion, and so were happy to work with Hitler. These churches combined to become the Reich Church in 1936 under Ludwig Miller, who Hitler made Bishop of Germany. If pastors supported the Nazis, they could continue preaching as long as they did not accept Jews into their congregation or baptize them as Christian, or teach the Old Testament, as effectively the Old Testament is the Jewish teaching as well. Some of these pastors supported the Nazis so much they even took to displaying the swastika in their church. However, not all Protestants accepted this, and many spoke out against the Nazis. The most famous of these was Pastor Martin Niemöller, pictured here, who was one of the founders of the Pastors' Emergency League, PEL, to campaign against the Nazis. Effectively, they used their church and their church congregation to try and influence people to oppose the Nazis and to speak out about the horrors of the Nazi regime. However, Niemöller was sent to a concentration camp in 1937 and the PEL was banned. So, in summary, the Nazi Germany was a police state, as people were controlled by the police, and was moving towards a totalitarian system of government where the government controlled all areas of public life. Hitler set up 3 different police forces, the SS, the SD and the Gestapo, to try and help him control people in Germany. The SS were in charge of all 3 and operated above the law in their actions. Ordinary people, however, were most scared of the Gestapo as they spied and informed on people. However, some argued that actually with the Gestapo, the fear of them was more effective than they actually were, as even though they collected lots of information on people, there was only a small-ish number of them, so they could not enforce many of the things they found out. The SS also set up concentration camps to imprison all the enemies of the state in isolated areas away from German eyes. And Hitler seized control of the legal system by ensuring the loyalty of the judges abolishing trial by jury, and by setting up a people's court to try cases of treason in secret. He signed a concordat with the Pope to stop the Catholic Church opposing him, and persuaded many Protestants to join his Reich Church and support the Nazis. However, the Pope tore up the concordat in 1937, and it was clear that Hitler was not sticking to it, and many Protestants opposed Hitler through the PEL.